All right. Good morning, folks. This is the annual meeting of the Colorado Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Board. We will start the meeting with a roll call.
Thank you, Board Member Robbins. Board Member Baca. Board Member Mendoza-Cook.
Here.
Board Member Murphy. Board Member Robbins.
Here.
Board Member Simmons.
Here.
You have 3 out of 5 board members present, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks. And I do anticipate that we'll find the other board members here in just a bit, but 3 out of 5 is a quorum. And so we are open for business. It is, for the record, Tuesday, September 26, 2023. It is 10:30-ish in the morning. And this meeting was duly published for our annual meeting today. Just to orient folks to this board, the Orphan Wells Mitigation Fee Enterprise Board is the state of Colorado's enterprise that oversees an industry-funded orphan well program with the highest level of environmental protections. The enterprise uses fees from the oil and gas industry to allow the ECMC, that's the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, formerly the COGCC, orphan well program to plug and abandon orphan wells and reclaim orphan well sites. The enterprise was established by legislation entitled SB 22-198. The board adopted rules implementing SB 22-198 in June of 2022 at the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Fee rulemaking. Those rules were effective July 30th of 2022. The board established an annual mitigation fee paid by industry that generates approximately $10 million annually and is responsive to address orphan wells in the state of Colorado. The fee will be revised annually, and that's one of the purposes for today's meeting, allowing the funding to increase or decrease depending upon the needs and anticipated scale of future orphan well work. This is the first annual meeting of the Orphan Wells Mitigation Fee Enterprise Board. We will have introductory remarks from board member Julie Murphy, who is also the ECMC director. And then we will have a presentation from ECMC Orphan Well Program Manager Dave Andrews. I would note for the record that board member Murphy is now present. So we now have 4 out of 5 commission members or board members with us. With that, the next place on the agenda is an opportunity for board members who may have comments for the good of the cause. Does any board member have comments, knowing Director Murphy, you're going to have comments on your own here in just a sec? All right, seeing no comments, we are going to now hear from board member and director of ECMC, Director Murphy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, board members and staff. I think it's a great opportunity that Colorado has created to oversee, and ensure protection for the state from the potential risk of orphan wells, and to create a program that is designed to protect taxpayers, protect landowners from that risk. As I focus on the work that we're doing on the staff side, right, recognizing my dual role, I'm really proud of the program, the Orphan Well program that Dave Andrews runs, and he's going to spend a lot more time talking today about what it is we've accomplished over the last fiscal year. I think a couple of things that I would like to note is that over the past 28 years, our program has spent approximately $5.7 million in total. In the last fiscal year, and for context, our fiscal year runs from July 1 to June 30th of every year. We spent over $10 million in a single year. And so that type of growth is a testament both to our team's capacity, our team's ability, our team's vision, and in particular, Mr. Andrews and his ability to prioritize a program and identify the tasks and move them through the system. And it's also a real commitment from the federal government. A big influx of those dollars were from the IIJA funding and also from Colorado's operators in terms of funding this enterprise and the work that it is doing to complement the funding received from the federal government. I think that some of the other things that are important to note is that, Colorado isn't taking a singular approach to, creating an enterprise that's designed to plan for some number of orphans. We've also taken a strong approach in our regulatory program to prevent orphans in the first place, because I think we can all agree that the collective goal and the collective best outcome is when operators plug oil and gas wells at the end of their useful life. So I can't help but take a moment to highlight our new financial assurance rules that came into place just over a year ago, and that we have been in the process of implementing over the ensuing time period. I think we have the strongest financial assurance rules that are really keyed into looking at the operator as a whole and accounting for how that operator is planning their assets, or planning to manage their assets, and looking in, I think as one of our commissioners calls it, looking in their sock drawer to understand what the plans are and how they're going to pan out. At this point in time, we've approved approximately 151 financial assurance plan that cover nearly 38,000 of Colorado's approximately 49,000 wells, with nearly $570 million imposed in financial assurance planning. I think that those are pretty great numbers if we look at bonding across the nation or financial assurance across the nation, and really looking at how to best protect Coloradans as we move forward with a protective oil and gas regulatory approach. And so it is in these new financial assurance rules that create the Orphan Wells Mitigation Enterprise Fee, which is what we're all here and responsible for managing. Again, this is an operator funded or oil and gas industry funded enterprise and fee. When it was first established, we expected it to generate approximately $10 million a year, and that continues to be the goal. Again, Dave will talk a little bit more about some of the other particulars of it. But I think with that, I'm just incredibly proud of the work that Coloradans have put into this board, and the work that Dave and his team have really put into plugging and reclaiming orphan well sites across Colorado and returning them to the surface owner for use. And with that, Dave, I hope I didn't get too much in the details of what you're going to present, but would love to limit my remarks at that point in time, and Chair, turn it back to you, and we can move forward.
Great. Thank you for the opening remarks. Director Murphy, Board Member Murphy, you need to have two hats with you at this point in time. Now we would recognize ECMC Orphan Well Manager Dave Andrews for his annual report.
Thank you, Chairman Robbins, and thank you, Board Member Murphy and Director Murphy. For the other board members, it's nice to see you again. My name is Dave Andrews, and I'm the Orphan Well Program Manager. I started work with the Commission nearly 18 years ago. Today, you will see how the program has grown since our last board meeting in December, how spending sources have changed with our new mix of funds, and where we stand with our current plugging count. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. As a recap, let's touch on what we do in the field. In cases where an oil and gas operator is unwilling or unable to comply with their obligations under ECMC's rules, the Orphan Well program plugs wells, abandons flow lines, decommissions production equipment, remediates environmental impacts, and performs final reclamation. Next slide, please. Today, I will review our recent growth, including staff and funding sources. I will discuss our current funding sources and how they're used. I will show our work progress and backlog. And finally, I will review our online resources. Next slide, please. Our work unit has expanded over the last 5 years to address large groups of wells bond claims that began to enter the program in 2015 and 2016. For reference, the state fiscal year starts on July 1 and ends on June 30th. Here you can see that our staffing levels increased and then ranged from 5 to 6 full-time employees through fiscal year 22, or FY22 for short. In FY23, we doubled our staff to account for added work with new federal grants. One position remains vacant, and we expect to fill that final grant-funded position this fiscal year as we move forward with our next federal grant application. Next slide, please. Historically, the Orphan Well program relied on bond claims, and starting in 1990, an annual budget appropriation. The budget appropriation has been funded by a production levy on the sales of oil and natural gas and by penalty revenues. New funding sources were introduced in FY23. The U.S. Department of Interior, or DOI, awarded ECMC an initial grant from the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or we call that IIJA for short for our accounting needs. In FY23, the Orphan Well program received ECMC director approval to spend the first $2.6 million from the Enterprise Fund for Orphan Well projects. Next slide, please. In October 2022, DOI awarded ECMC $25 million for the initial grant, covering a 2-year period through September 2024. The initial grant is the first of several grants that are expected to fund the program through September 2030. For the initial grant, we passed a significant hurdle following the board's last meeting in December. DOI gave states only 90 days to obligate 90% of the $25 million from the initial grant. The Orphan Well program obligated 95% of the $25 million by the deadline. Our next deadline is the end of this month, when we will have 100% of the remaining $25 million of the initial grant obligated. DOI has opened the application window for the next federal grant, called the Formula Grant. OWP staff will be preparing the application package during the next 2 months, and we expect to submit our application in December for the first $25 million portion of the Formula Grant. The Formula Grant will span a 5-year period. We are well positioned for the regulatory improvement grants based on plugging rules passed in 2014, expansion of the program in recent years, and ECMC's new financial assurance rules to grow the Enterprise Fund. We also expect to participate in the matching grant. Next slide, please. Growth is evident with our spending pattern during the last 5 years. After our first year of hiring and training new staff in FY19, program spending increased, nearly reaching $5 million in FY20. Expenditures declined during the pandemic because of limited cash flow from production levy and an unfilled staff vacancy. In FY22, we exceeded $5 million overall, including bond spending. In FY23, program spending exceeded $10 million, with most of the funding coming from the federal initial grant. Also in FY23, we spent our first enterprise funds on the beginning of a larger group of projects that are being performed in FY24. This slide shows how our funding mix has changed, with FY23 showing the largest change. From top to bottom on the legend, the state appropriation, the uppermost green color, declined in FY23. Bonds shown in yellow have been a relatively small portion of the overall spending each year. The next 2 funding sources are new for FY23. A large portion of the expenses funded by the federal grant in red, and a small amount shown at the bottom for the Orphan Well Mitigation Enterprise Fund in blue. Next slide, please. As mentioned on the previous slide, bonds have typically represented a small portion of overall spending in any given fiscal year. We expect that trend to continue in FY24. The state appropriation included 2-year spending authority in FY23 that rolled into FY24. The legislature did not authorize new state appropriation funds for FY24. The federal grant estimate represents the remaining project portion of the initial grant that was not spent in FY23. The federal fiscal year, unlike the state fiscal year, begins on October 1st and ends on September 30th. Therefore, initial grant field work will continue into July and August 2024, which are the first 2 months of the state fiscal year, and we will wrap up payments for the initial grant work in September 2024. Towards the end of FY23, the program sought and received ECMC director approval to spend up to $2.6 million on contractor activities to support other work that was obligated to the state appropriation and to the federal grant. Our newest funding source was approved this month for a cooperative agreement with BLM to perform work on federal sites. The BLM agreement covers a 5-year period, and we expect to have up to $2 million available for federal fiscal year 24. Next slide, please. The program plugged 61 wells in FY23, the same number plugged in FY20. While the number of plugged wells declined from FY22 to 23, work included more activity and higher spending compared to prior years on flow line abandonment, equipment decommissioning, sampling and analysis, methane monitoring, which is a new requirement of the federal grant, and reclamation. Next slide, please. This chart illustrates how our site count, the red columns on the right, relates to our well count, the blue columns on the left. Site closure lags behind plugging because it often takes several growing seasons before the site passes final reclamation. We hired 2 new reclamation specialists in FY22 to address the growing reclamation backlog, which is represented by the spread between the blue and red columns. While our plugging backlog declined, a new surge is upon us with more than 200 wells added since July 1st, which is not shown on this slide. Next slide, please. The Orphan Well Program map layer on ECMC's GIS plots orphan sites that have a planned status with no site expenditures so far, an in-progress status for sites where work has commenced, but the site has not yet passed final reclamation, and a completed status for sites that are closed. There's also a federal layer for sites with federal jurisdiction. Next slide, please. More information, including our FY23 annual report, is available on our website. A link to the website is shown on this slide, or the site may be accessed from the ECMC website by clicking on Regulation in the green bar, then Orphan Well Program in the blue bar. Once you are on the program website, the annual reports are available on the reports page. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time today, and I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Andrews. Fantastic summary of all of the work that has been done, the money that has been received, and the money that has been expended. I had just a quick question on the in progress. If you could go back to that slide.
Hannah, that would be the map.
The map. Yep. That one. Yeah. So there's quite a few that are in progress. I think I understand why the Orphan Well is plugged and then it takes time for reclamation, but could you explain that to folks that may be listening?
Sure. There's several activities that take place when we're working on an orphan well site. If there's a well there to plug, that's one of the first things to be done. At times, depending on how we phase things, some of the equipment decommissioning or flow line abandonment work may precede the well plugging, but ordinarily the well is plugged first. So for well plugging, that may be, a few days in the field or maybe a week in the field. Same thing for the flow lines and the decommissioning, but those may be spaced apart because we use different contractors for each activity. And then similarly, when we come in for environmental work or reclamation work, that may be a different contractor at a different time after the initial work is done. And then the symbols on the map remain as the red cross until the site is completely finished and we pass final reclamation on the site, which essentially pulls it out of the program at that point.
Great. Thank you very much for that explanation. So another question that I had, we can drop the slideshow. I don't need it anymore. Is, this board is to meet annually to consider whether to increase, decrease, or leave in place the enterprise fees that have been set. Is that something that we're doing today? I guess I asked for general calls. And if so, Mr. Andrews, do you have a recommendation along those lines?
I see Director and Board Member
Director Murphy?
muted.
Thank you, Chair, and recognizing my dual hats. Based on the work that Mr. Andrews' team has done and the level of federal funding at this point in time, as well as the lack of really spending down the mitigation or the enterprise board's funding, at this point, staff has not requested a change to the fee. And so the indirect result would be that the recommendation would be to leave it as is and not adjust the fee.
Okay, and again, I should know this, but remind me, the fees are, was it 125 and 225, depending upon production?
Roughly, I'd also have to go back and look at the preciseness of that. Yes.
I think that's the case. As folks can tell, we're new at this. This is our first meeting, so we're trying to do our best here. Board Member Simmons or Board Member Mendoza-Cook, do you have any questions? If you do, you can just unmute. If not, you can just shake your head.
Thanks, Chair Robbins. I think the question that I would have is, Mr. Andrews, I'm wondering if you could explain how the wells are prioritized. I think you had mentioned that there was additional 200 wells that have been added to the list since July 1st, but I think it would be helpful for folks to understand as your team goes through review of each one of these sites, how you all determine a priority to plug and abandon within that list.
Thank you for the question, Board Member Simmons. For the prioritization of sites after they enter the program, we have a fairly complex routine that they go through to actually come up with a rank. Some of that starts with available information from our GIS system. So we have some data that comes out of that system that includes population, density, and urbanization. That's one of the main factors there. Age of the site, and then environmental or potential environmental concerns. So proximity to surface water, proximity to groundwater, that type of thing. So those are all GIS based. And then we've got additional information that comes in from the well files, in particular, the condition of the well. So depending on whether or not, well, the age of the well plays a lot into that, and how well it was constructed, the standards at the time when it was constructed, and whether or not that, forces us to push it up ahead in the priority. Some other factors for the well include results from Bradenhead testing, results from mechanical integrity testing, any known leaks at the surface. So if there's a situation where we have a new well that comes into the program and there's we've observed let's say a gas leak on the wellhead at the surface. If it is feasible to do so, we may proceed with a stopgap measure for a wellhead repair prior to actually plugging the well. And that could in and of itself reduce the score, because then at that point it's no longer leaking. So we can implement some stopgap measures, but it really comes down to the condition of the well. Some other factors could include information related to historical spills. If there's been any known spills at the site or observed spills during field inspection reports, we rely on those heavily to get our first look at site conditions. So the photos and the inspection reports by our compliance unit from ECMC, as well as their description on the field inspection reports. A few other things that come into play include disturbance area. So from a reclamation standpoint, if we have a 3-acre site compared to a half-acre site, the 3-acre site is going to score higher. We again rely on our field inspection reports for any indications of weeds, either undesirable or noxious. That plays into the score. There's probably a few other factors I'm missing, but those are the big ones.
Fantastic. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. If I may, I have one additional question. Wondering if you all have a projection for how many wells you think you'll be able to plug and at least start reclamation on for FY24.
At our current rate, we are plugging around 60 to 70 wells per year. And I don't see that changing at least for the next year, because we're also trying to work in other equipment decommissioning and environmental and reclamation projects. So, we have to maintain a balance to make sure we're moving forward on all parts of the work at each site, as well as making sure that our staff is fully utilized.
Thank you. Chair Robbins, I turn it back over to you.
Great. Thank you, Board Member Simmons. Any further questions for the panel from the board members? All right. So our recommendation is to leave the annual fees as is. That's $125 per well for wells in which the production is less than 15 BOE or 22 MCFE, and $225 per well for any well that is higher than those production thresholds. I believe, and I would like to call upon our Attorney General Kyle Davenport, that under Rule 205, the annual well registration mitigation fee dollar amount will only be modified by the enterprise board. Given that the recommendation is not to modify the amount, if we do nothing, AG Davenport, do the fees coincide with the recommendation, i.e. they remain the same?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, is the short answer. You're referring, I believe, to ECMC Rule 205, which does provide that, as well as the statute creating the enterprise board provides that it is the board's primary duty to determine whether or not a change needs to be made to the mitigation fee. If this board takes no action, then the fee does remain as stated currently in ECMC's rules, which is $225 per well for wells with higher production and $125 per well for wells with lower production. The cutoff for production line is 15 BOE barrels of oil equivalent or 22 MCFE. That's 1,000 cubic feet of gas equivalent. So that's the current status of the fee, mitigation fee.
Well, seeing as how we only meet once a year, and seeing as how I would like us to do something, I would like to make a motion that we keep the fees as is for the next year, as was articulated by AAG Davenport.
I second and completely agree with that, Chair Robbins.
Wonderful. Is there discussion on the motion by the board members? Seeing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
That's 4 ayes. The motion passes unanimously, and we have done something today, guys and girls.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, Director Murphy.
As you noted, perhaps staff's position wasn't perfectly clear. I would perhaps call on maybe AAG Davenport and Mr. Andrews and maybe some of the other staff team to pull together like whether it's a memo to the board or a standard operating procedure to outline kind of how we would want to bring forward a request to change the fee so that the public can be informed about what that process could be, and we can help our future board members understand that process as well as ourselves.
AAG Davenport, is that something that you could help out with Mr. Andrews?
Of course, happy to do that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think, at some point it's likely we're going to need to make adjustments. It's just that things are going along pretty well, especially with the federal money that has been received. So staying the course for this year does make some sense, I think, to all four commissioners or board members that are with us today. You are so directed to AG Davenport. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the suggestion, Board Member Murphy.
Thank you, Chair and AG Davenport.
All right. Anything else for the good of the cause? Seeing nothing, thank you, board members, for your service to the state. We do appreciate it. Thank you, Ms. Mendoza-Cook, for agreeing to be renominated to your board seat. We're thankful for that. I think you've got a 3-year term now. And with that, I guess I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So
So
moved.
moved.
Jinx. Second.
Motion, a second, and a jinx. All those in favor to adjourn signify by saying aye.
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 We are adjourned. See you next year.
Thanks.